Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Security forces in Saudi Arabia are surrounding a house where a number of gunmen are fortified in the city of Aras and Qasim, 300 kilometers northwest of Riyadh. The Saudi Ministry of Interior announced that the security forces killed 7, not 8 gunmen, as reported earlier. Violent clashes claimed the life of a police officer and left many others wounded.
The Saudi police are waging a fierce and ongoing battle to pursue armed groups, or the Gone Astray group, as noted several times in Saudi statements, referring to the Saudi division of the Al-Qaeda network. For the past 24 hours, the city of Aras, north of the capital Riyadh, has been the stage of a new episode of bloody attacks in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. For more than 2 years, attacks such as these have killed more than 200 people, including 92 suspects, 90 civilians, and 39 officers. Initial reports of the fighting in Aras, in the area of Qasim, in central Saudi Arabia, indicate that 8 gunmen were killed and a number of Saudi policemen were wounded. Security sources refused to announce the number of people killed during clashes, but they said that 35 security officers were wounded by shrapnel. In Aras, reports vary on the number of gunmen fortified inside the building. The security agencies estimate that there are 20 armed men, including organizational leaders. Eyewitnesses indicate that fierce clashes using all kinds of weapons continued for the 3rd consecutive day between the armed group fortified in one of the city's homes and the Saudi security forces, who are surrounding the house under the cover of helicopters. Analysts predict that the death toll may increase, especially since security officers confirm that the fighting has not settled. Eyewitnesses confirmed that an exchange of gunfire could be heard in the suburbs of the city of Aras. According to Saudi security sources, their forces have the situation under control. They created a tight security belt around the area where the gunmen sought refuge, adding that eliminating them completely is only a matter of time.
His Majesty King Abdullah, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, called on the General Command of the Armed Forces. The King discussed with Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lieutenant General Khalid Jamil al-Saraira, a number of military-related issues. Roman Catholic cardinals from across the world converged on the Vatican for a conclave to elect the new pontiff to succeed Pope John Paul II. 65 out of 117 princes of the Church met in the Vatican today to arrange the Pope's funeral. They must pledge not to reveal their deliberations, so none of them has publicly mentioned any name of a favorite successor. But 2 days after the Pope died and 2 weeks or so before the conclave is expected to start discussions to elect a new head of the Catholic Church, cautious comments from some cardinals have given clues to their thinking. Some have hinted that they would welcome a pontiff from the developing world, while others said the next leader of the world's 1.1 billion Roman Catholics should be a doctrinal conservative like John Paul. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of pilgrims flocked to St. Peter's Basilica, where the Pope will be laid to rest on Friday. Dan Abusham has the details.
Pope John Paul II's funeral will take place on Friday, April 8th. 75 cardinals from all over the world also decided in their second session today that until then the Pope's body will be laying inside St. Peter's Cathedral for the public to pay their respects. And because of the unprecedented numbers of people expected to flock to the Vatican to bid their last farewell to one of the most charismatic persons in history, the cardinals have decided to leave the Basilica open day and night until Friday. The funeral is expected to draw the greatest tide of pilgrims and heads of state to the Vatican in its history, to bid farewell to the pontiff who took his message to more nations than any predecessor in 2 millennia. U.S. President George W. Bush will be among close to 200 world leaders to attend, while Britain's Prince Charles postponed by 1 day his wedding on Friday in order to attend the funeral. The Vatican spokesman confirmed that the Pope will be buried under the Basilica, as is customary for deceased pontiffs, dismissing speculation that John Paul had expressed a wish to be buried in his native Poland. Cardinals are the Pope's top advisors. Their mission is to plan the Church's future after the death of the man who led it for a quarter century. The job of 117 cardinals is electing a papal successor from among their own ranks in a conclave after the death of a pontiff. No date has yet been set for the conclave.
Whoever is chosen Pope will have large shoes to fill, as we say in the United States. But the cardinals, during the next 15 or 20 days, will be meeting in what they call general meetings to discuss exactly what they see the challenges facing the Church are in the next decade or two, and the style of papacy that they hope for.
Only those under the age of 18 are eligible to participate. They hail from 5 continents and 53 different countries. There are no official candidates, and cardinals are forbidden by church law to discuss the issue in public. They are also banned from revealing details of the discussions and voting inside the locked Sistine Chapel where their conclave meets. And while cardinals met, crowds gathered to pay their last respect to the third longest reigning pontiff. The Pope's corpse, clad in crimson and white vestments, continued to be put on view for dignitaries and church leaders. His face clearly showed signs of the physical suffering that racked him in the final days of his life. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, one of Christianity's holiest sites and traditionally believed to be the place where Jesus was crucified, mourners gathered to attend a special mourning service in honor of the late Pope. The crowds had been flocking to the church since hearing the news of the Pope's passing on Saturday night. Jerusalem's Latin Patriarch Michel Sabah praised the Pope for trying to heal ancient wounds and forge a brighter future for the Middle East.
During his pilgrimage here, he was a pilgrim of peace. He brought a message of peace. He spoke the right words to the Israeli, to the Palestinians. He preached peace. He went, then we had no peace but war. Nevertheless, I think due to his spiritual message, he left a message in the hearts of the people and the land.
The Vatican ambassador to Israel also hailed the Pope for his peacemaking efforts.
He has been the Pope of peace. He has not been afraid to put himself in the most complicated situation of the present world, and with truth and courage, strongly he affirmed that violence will not bring peace.
In Bethlehem and at the Church of the Nativity, where Christians believe Jesus was born, few people attended early morning prayers. However, crowds are expected to slowly trickle in throughout the day, as was the case during the past 2 days. The Pope enjoyed a strong relationship with the Palestinians and Israel, which was strengthened with a historic visit to the Holy Land. World leaders hailed him as a force for peace and interfaith dialogue across the globe during his 26-year papacy. This is Dana Awsham for Jordan Television.
Roman Catholic cardinals gathered for the first time since Pope John Paul's death to organize a funeral, expected to draw the greatest tide of pilgrims and heads of state to the Vatican in its history. The body of Pope John Paul, who died Saturday, ending a historic papacy spanning 26 years, will be taken to St. Peter's Basilica for public viewing. Sarah Khoury has a story.
News of Pope John Paul II's death has brought cardinals of the Church to Rome to prepare for the conclave set for later this month that would elect a new man to run the 1.1 billion member church. Up to 200,000 worshippers gathered in St. Peter's Square to hear the Pope's own words read out at a Requiem Mass for the world's best-known religious leader who helped topple communism and stamped a rigid orthodoxy on his church. The text, which was read out by an archbishop, said, "It is love which converts hearts and gives peace." Roman Catholic cardinals would have to swear an oath to maintain strict secrecy about all matters in any way related to the election of the Roman pontiff. According to pre-written rules, they must then decide the funeral rites. John Paul is expected to be interred in a crypt under St. Peter's. Inside the Vatican, the Pope's corpse, clad in a crimson and white vestment, was put on view for the world by Vatican TV. Personal aides, cardinals, bishops, nuns, dignitaries, and Vatican employees filed past the man they had served and loved for more than a quarter of a century. Hundreds of thousands of faithful will pay their respects when his body is transferred to the Carnivus Basilica today, before the funeral, which many believe will be held on Friday. Roman authorities are braced for as many as 2 million mourners, including more than 100 heads of states, in the largest such event the city has seen. John Paul was the third longest-serving pope in 2,000 years of Christianity, meaning he was able to handpick almost all the cardinals who will enter the conclave, stacking the odds that his conservative teachings will not be eroded.
Late Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri's family expressed its deepest condolences to the world's Christians, especially Catholics in Lebanon and the Arab world, for the death of Pope John Paul. Hariri's family paid tribute to the friendly relationship and cooperation that existed between the slain premier and the late pontiff. Mrs. Nazik Hariri also sent a letter of condolences to Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Angelo Sodano, voicing sadness for the pontiff's loss. She highlighted his backing for just causes and his steadfast support for human rights all over the world. Mrs. Hariri paid tribute to the Pope's legacy, which she stressed will have an impact on generations to come throughout the world. In her letter, Mrs. Hariri hailed Pope John Paul II's efforts to end Lebanon's war and cement national unity and peaceful coexistence. She said the Lebanese will never forget the pontiff, who described their country as a message of diversity and freedom. She pointed to the late Prime Minister's special ties with the Pope, citing their many encounters that benefited Lebanon. Christian, Muslim, and Jewish leaders in the Middle East paid a unanimous tribute to the Pope, who visited 5 Middle Eastern countries during his 26-year tenure. Habib Attah has a story.
Pope John Paul II, the first pope to enter a mosque and a synagogue, drew praise from a wide spectrum of religious leaders across the Middle East for his insistence on interfaith reconciliation. The pontiff visited Lebanon, Israel, and the West Bank, as well as Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. In Lebanon, which was the first Middle East country to receive the Pope in 1997, all TV programs were interrupted, including that of Hezbollah's El Manar satellite TV, to broadcast live from the Vatican after the announcement of his death. Leading Shiite cleric Ayatollah Muhammad Hussein Fadlallah said he hoped the course of dialogue chartered by the Holy See will lead to all religions converging on the faith in God. 3 days of mourning were declared in Lebanon, where President Emil Lahoud, the region's only Christian leader, called the Pope a great friend who has always had a special place in his heart for Lebanon and its many religions. Lahoud and a number of state officials will participate in the pontiff's funeral. In the heart of biblical land, Jews praise his efforts to improve ties between Judaism and the Roman Catholic Church, while Palestinians stress his unwavering support for their cause. Latin Patriarch Michel Sabah, the Vatican's senior representative in the Holy Land, said the pontiff raised his voice repeatedly for justice and peace at a service in Nazareth's Basilica of the Annunciation. In Bethlehem, vigils accompanied the pontiff to his death, and memorial services were held Sunday. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon described the Pope as a man of peace and a friend to the Jewish people. In Egypt, President Hosni Mubarak declared 3 days of mourning in the predominantly Muslim country to pay tribute to the Pope, whom he described as a symbol of peace and love. The Cairo-based Arab League hailed the Pope's quest for justice and equality in the Middle East, while Iranian President Mohammad Khatami heaped praise on John Paul, describing him as a disciple of religious mysticism, philosophic deliberation, and thought in artistic and poetic creativity. United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan said the Pope, in his efforts to promote peace, justice, and love among all mankind, was, quote, the antithesis of those who advocated a closed and dogmatic interpretation of the universal message of Almighty God. In Kuwait, home to some 200 native Christians, Emir Sheikh Jabir Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah deplored the loss of a great man who initiated interfaith dialogue. Al-Sabah said the Muslim community was prepared to cooperate with John Paul's successor, whom he hoped would follow in his footsteps. Leading Muslim clerics across the region also paid tribute, including Sheikh Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, seen as the highest authority in Sunni Islam. He said the death of the Pope was a great loss for the Catholic Church and Muslim world, describing the pontiff as a man who defended the values of justice and peace and worked for the victory of relations between the Muslim and Christian peoples based on friendship and love. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said the pontiff spoke clearly in favor of understanding between Christianity and Islam and had backed the rights of the Palestinian people and all peoples to a free and independent homeland. Meanwhile, King Abdullah of Jordan also expressed his deep sorrow over the passing of the Pope.
An official from the Palestinian Security Services announced that the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has put the security services in the West Bank in a state of emergency, where the security forces began deploying last Saturday. The deployment of these forces comes amidst a crisis which was a result of armed men from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade shooting inside the presidential headquarters in Ramallah in the West Bank last Wednesday. As a result of this, Lieutenant Ismail Jaber, the president of the National Security in the West Bank, and Tawfiq al-Tirawi, the head of the Palestinian Security Services in the West Bank, submitted their resignations.
Sad moments were remembered by Palestinians in the Jenin refugee camp, where they commemorated the third year of the Israeli incursion into the camp during the Al-Aqsa Intifada. This incursion created dozens of martyrs and many were injured, as well as major destruction to the buildings where the raids took place. The residents of the camp commemorated the third year of the incursion in a massive march, denouncing the Israeli occupation and its practices.
In this commemoration, we renew our vow and loyalty to the martyrs, the families, the wounded, and the Palestinians living in the diaspora. Their sons in the West Bank and in the Jenin refugee camp are still fighting until the last breath, until we establish a liberated Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital and the return of all Palestinian refugees.
In a surprising development regarding the security difficulties, and as a result of the security breakdowns that took place in Ramallah, some officials from the security leadership in the West Bank submitted their resignations. At the top of this list was Ismail Jaber, the head of the security in the West Bank. In a three-way meeting, President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, Prime Minister Ahmed Qurayya, and Minister of Interior Nasser Youssef accepted Jaber's resignation and the resignation of Yunus Al-Aas, the head of the security in the Ramallah area, as well as General Samih Abdel Majid.
Iraqi political parties entered a new wave of negotiations over ways to form government institutions after overcoming one obstacle, naming a president for the new parliament.
The Iraqis ended one round of sectarian arguments over who will preside over the National Assembly. The three main groups, the Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds, now have to overcome their tribal disputes so they can form a new government. However, the ongoing negotiations seem to be difficult because of the Kurdish demands for the inclusion of Kirkuk city in the Kurdish part of Iraq, finding a legal way to maintain the Peshmerga militia, and having veto power over future government decisions. Some of them are presenting these demands as if they are not putting the interests of one ethnic group over the national interest of Iraq.
The Sunnis will participate actively in writing the constitution and forming the new Iraqi government. We hope that we no longer use terms like Sunnis and Shiites, because that is what makes the Iraqi society. We are Iraqis before everything.
Arguments over the formation of the government and the presidential cabinet are stemming from the tragedies of the past years and fears that they may be repeated in the future. Like the Sunnis, the Kurds want to make sure that they have legal protection, which makes the task of running the National Assembly meetings aimed at forming the new government more difficult for Hajim al-Hashimi and his two deputies.
The President of the National Assembly and his two deputies will lead the process of forming the Presidential Cabinet, which also includes the President and his two deputies. Then, the Presidential Cabinet will supervise the naming of the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister will name his ministers. Within this week, all these issues will be resolved in an organized manner.
The negotiations between the United Iraqi Alliance and the Kurdish Alliance will most likely reach a conclusion by the end of this week. They will reach an agreement on who should be the president and the prime minister of the country. Prominent members of the National Assembly talked about supporting the candidacy of Ibrahim al-Jafari for the prime minister's office and the candidacy of the Kurdish Jalal Talabani for the president. The Ministry of Education held its annual festival, which usually includes artistic and educational activities by the school administrations in Baghdad and other provinces. The artistic activities that were carried out by the Ministry of Education, in coordination with school administrations, have changed since the days of the dictatorship, when they were focused on war, the policy of one party and one leader, far away from love of country and the education of the student. However, today, the voices of students sing for the love of country.
The part of the program, which you just saw, was a joint project with the Ministry of Education, the Directorate of the School Activities, and the UNICEF organization, in order to hold some school activities and make plans in order to let the students prosper and progress. Of course, this festival is an annual event hosted by the Ministry of Education. This time, the UNICEF organization cooperated with the ministry to support this festival.
The artistic works, banners, paintings, and plays tell a story of a united nation with all its sects and religions.
I'm participating in a play titled The Lion and the Tough Punishment, which was written by Professor Muhammad Majid. This play says that power is in the mind, not in the body. I hope that this play succeeds with the help of Mr. Muhammad Majid and also with the songs by Mr. Hadi.
The progress of the people relies in a fundamental way on education, with the goal of raising an educated and aware generation. At one point in the past, the educational institutions were productive, but then the former regime made them meaningless and manipulated them to serve their own agenda. Will we see productive and serious educational activities today? From the looks of the children, one can tell there is a promising future. Jalil Bani, Iraqiya, Baghdad. Now to the region of Kashmir, a disputed area between India and Pakistan. Kashmiri families are meeting at the separation line amidst efforts to improve ties between Delhi and Islamabad. Our correspondent Jamal Ismail was at the separating line in Kashmir, where he met with Kashmiri families, hoping for peace in the region. The dispute between India and Pakistan over Kashmir broke up many homes. Families have been feeling the bitterness of separation and the parting of loved ones for years. But ending years of conflict between India and Pakistan, in which Kashmir was the focal point of the dispute, and replacing it with cooperation and harmony between the two countries, are giving families hope to reunite. India and Pakistan took steps to normalize ties, despite the ongoing disputes over Kashmir, which is the subject of the conflict. Amidst news of improved ties between the two countries, Kashmiri families were permitted to gather at the shores of the Jhelum and Neelam River in Kashmir to see each other until bus routes were instated between the two sides of Kashmir.
The people met at the shores of the river. It was an opportunity for them to see each other instead of going through a difficult process of getting a visa, traveling to Lahore, then Delhi before they arrived to Kashmir. This reduces the stress, but it is still not the ideal solution.
These meetings are not the ideal situation for Kashmiri people and are not sufficient for those who have been deprived of seeing their fathers, brothers, or sons for a long time. But without a doubt, they help in reducing the crisis for many people. Hundreds of them gathered at the shores of the Jhelum River to see the loved ones they were separated from due to politics and the conflict between India and Pakistan.
Look, a mother is on one shore and the children are on the other. Only a river separating them, and they cannot cross to meet each other. We are happy to meet here, but we want open borders so we can travel throughout Kashmir without obstacles from the two countries.
Families in Kashmir are demanding a resolution to their problem so that the borders can be reopened. But for now, their hardships and the pain and yearning for loved ones continues. Kashmiri families from both sides came to see each other on the shores of the Jhelum River, and families were able to check on each other. But what they are really hoping for is for open borders and a final and fair resolution to the Kashmir issue, so people can move freely as they please between the disputed Kashmiri areas. Reporting for Madar News, Jamal Ismail, Abu Dhabi TV, in front of the Kashmiri government headquarters.
Black plastic bags don't only litter the environment, but are bad for it and are a danger to people's health, especially those who use it on a daily basis. The Ministry of Environment is working with the manufacturers of these bags to adopt a joint plan to gradually stop producing these black plastic bags by the end of this year. For more details, we turn to Fatima Zahra Hafawi.
حفاظا على صحة المواطن وحفاظا على البيئة لما يسببه الكيس البلاستيكي الأسود من خطورة نظرا لما يحتويه من مواد.
To protect citizens' health and to protect the environment from these black bags that are dangerous and known to contain lead, mercury, cadmium, and other harmful chemicals, the Ministry of Environment has reached an agreement with the manufacturers of these bags to adopt a joint plan to gradually stop producing and eliminate black plastic bags by December 31st, 2005.
من ديسمبر لسنة 2005.
التقنية الجديدة هي أنه فيه تخصصات في المهنة يصبحوا تخصصات المنتجين.
The new technology is that there are specialties within the profession. The manufacturers can produce the normal plastic bags, but not the black ones. They can produce them, but they have to follow certain guidelines which are noted in the protocol. Those who want to specialize in manufacturing bags for groceries will only have to follow the guidelines.
المواد الغذائية ومنها الخبز واللحوم، السمك والفواكه.
Groceries such as bread, meat, fish, fruits, and other food products should not be touching plastic bags that are not subject to the formula guidelines specifying the type of bag, expiration date, and the trademark. July 2nd, 2005 is the deadline to start enforcing the technical guidelines to eliminate black plastic bags.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.